All right, so we finally get to the end of our religion chapter, and so we're looking at religious conflicts and challenges. And so what we've looked at so far is kind of what are religions, where are they located, why are they located where they are, connections to the landscape, how they change the land, things like that. And so now we're looking at, what is the reason behind religious conflicts, and how does that tie again to land and everything else related to it. And we'll expand on a number of these things as well within the ethnic and political units as well, because this is just kind of skimming the surface of a few of the different tensions and issues kind of affecting the world both historically and modern. So our essential question here is to examine reasons why geographic conflict occurs between religious groups and secular groups, and also just between different religions as well. So yeah. So the first case we're going to look at here is the Indian or Hindu caste system. So Hinduism itself is kind of connected to this idea of the caste system, and so Hinduism essentially, there's a thing, the idea of reincarnation. And so essentially what you do in this life is going to affect what happens to you in the next life. So if you perform well your duties, you're good to your family, you do whatever your assigned job in life or duty based on, where you are in this caste system, that is going to affect, what happens to you in the next life. And the idea behind the caste system was that essentially you're born into this part of society, and there is nothing you can do about it during this life. So if you're born, in this, phase of this, Hindu caste system pyramid, the Sudra, a commoner, peasant, or servant, you can't move out of that. You are in there the rest of your life, and so the only thing you can do is to behave dutifully. And if you do that, you can move up in the next life to, a Vaishya. Okay, that's a merchant or a landowner. Or if you perform poorly or adequately, you might stay as a Sudra, or you might even get out of the caste system and move into an untouchable. All right, and so this was the setup in India under the caste system for a very long time, for essentially hundreds, if not thousands, of years. And so the idea is at the very end is that through these good deeds and moving up, you can eventually merge your soul, kind of reach enlightenment, similar to Hinduism, or not Hinduism, Buddhism, in the Buddha. When you become enlightened, you can achieve this in the end of your life. And that's kind of a draw that the Buddhists actually had, because they are, kind of a branch in a slight way connected to Hinduism. But within India, that also means that, there's a reason to treat people or to not interact with people on different levels, because if they're part of a different social class, you're not supposed to, make contact with them, especially the untouchables are out of the caste system, and so they don't even get recognition as essentially as people. And when the British came in the 17 and 1800s and started to create trade in India and started to sort of take over as a colony, they were trying to get rid of the caste system because they looked at it as a form of social inequality and saying this is not okay, and we want to impose a more social or equitable thing that we believe would get rid of the system. And so India has actually in many cases gotten rid of it, at least officially. And there's a link in Schoology about how there are slight hints and variations of the caste system, how it still sort of exists kind of as a shadow entity within India and also beyond, between Indian peoples, throughout the rest of the globe, where people are trying to still figure out, should I hang out with this person based on said caste? And so this has been a long-standing problem because, again, these are social issues, because if you're not going to interact or support people that are down on their luck or can't, and you don't allow them to move up in the world, you're essentially perpetuating poverty and saying, well, it's their fault for what they did in a previous life, and not necessarily granting them access. India has made gains, as you'll see within that reading. But again, it's just kind of the setup of, this is a long-standing tradition that you're trying to break from within the other ideas, right? So yeah. Often, as we connected back to the idea of dowries, which we briefly mentioned, in chapter 4 with culture, in the sense of, again, the marriage, that you don't marry outside your caste. And yeah. So switching again to another case study is the idea of communism and the idea of religious suppression and the long-standing problems within that. So looking at it both in the Soviet Union and Russia, but also looking at it within China. For those that don't know what communism is, essentially, communism is the idea of the government running everything for a time, and then, you reach a worker's paradise where everyone shares everything equally. There is no private ownership of anything. Everyone gets what they need to survive. A complete equitable system under sort of a perfect world. And I'm not going to lie, I'm not a communist, but if it was possible for this to work perfectly, this would be a very good way to live, because there would be no need for profit. There would be no need for, you know, selfishness or greed, or there would be no hunger. Everyone would be treated well, and it would be a good system if it could possibly happen, right? So communists, however, are not the biggest fan of religion because they believe that religion interferes with the ideas of how to run a society. Because in the mind of a true communist, or at least communist political leaders in the Soviet Union and China, typically look at it in terms of religion offers a false hope that at the end of this life there is something else. So it kind of distracts you from real problems and solutions to things that are actually going on that would solve your problems in the here and now. All right, so they would try to limit religion to younger generations to increase faith within the idea of communism, so there's less competition between the two ideals, the two essential philosophies. Karl Marx, the founder of communism, even said he called religion the opium of the people. It's essentially a drug to sedate people, to keep them blind to the real problems that are going on in the world. And for many, that stands out as the reason for why communism was such a draw in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and to a few generations afterwards, and why people might still be drawn to it now. And that's kind of the look of the religion is a false hope, right? Because it doesn't solve any real problems. It's, you believe in a spirituality that will save you after all this has happened, not going to save you for now, or things like that, right? So what this does in communist countries is led to a large decrease in religious participation. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, particularly so like Russia, the Ukraine, Kazakhstan, places like that, there's been a lot of strong revivals of religion, or at least attempted revivals. However, and we'll see an image of that here, like a little graphic with a map here, kind of back-ending that. But within China, however, where there's still a communist government in charge, they've suppressed Buddhist leaders for a very long time, and their Buddhist lifestyles, including the Dalai Lama, who's not allowed back into China for fear of putting up a rebellion because of, China is essentially in control of Tibet, which they invaded, and, essentially outcast Buddhists to maintain a stronger hold on it and sedate the population. But even now, and this is something you're going to read about, it's not in the study guide, but it's something more that you could use for stuff that you will find and probably will come up later on, are the Uyghurs in China, in the Xinjiang province. And so Uyghurs are written like this, and that's how it's said. And it's a Muslim group located in the western part. It's on very, resource-rich land, so oil, gas. I think there might be some coal in there as well. I'm not 100% certain on that. But essentially, the Uyghurs are being essentially put into concentration camps. They're not being killed, but essentially re-educated into more Chinese values, because the Chinese feel or fear that if the Uyghurs are pushed off their land, but also, with other, Islamic extremist groups out there, that the Uyghurs will side with them and against China. And so the Chinese are afraid of that, but also the idea that the Uyghurs might get out of control because they are still following religious practices, that they will turn against China if they are pushed off their land, if things go bad. And so they want to sort of sedate them, in a manner of speaking, right? As we'll see here. And this is a current issue, affecting, more than 10 million Chinese Muslims who are Uyghurs. And they've been there for thousands of years, kind of moving along migration patterns and trade and all that stuff, and settling in that part of the country. So going back to the Russia thing, all right? So participants of people who attend religious services at least once a month and or believe in God. And so 1991 is when the Soviet Union essentially collapsed, and Russia and Russia and the Ukraine, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan. That's when these countries essentially became independent and formed up and became their own again. So yeah, you kind of see the increase in the number of people participating in religious services. Belief in God, belief in life after death is sort of kind of still there, but ascribe themselves at least somewhat religious has been increasing. The participation that identifies with each certain group, Orthodox Christian, which has been embedded within Russian society over the last 14-ish hundred years, if not longer, has continued to grow, especially again after that time period. By this is 2008 standards, but again very high. Other religions has sort of increased, but unaffiliated has gone down after the fall of communism. All right. So, here is the location of the Soviet Union. You kind of see all the countries within that. All the countries right here, starting with Kazakhstan with number 11, they all end in the word stan, or the letter stan, S-T-A-N, and that essentially means it's an Islamic state. Like Pakistan is a state of Islam. Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, they're all Islamic states. And so those have seen increases within that. So you kind of see, here within Russia itself, small pockets of Judaism kind of in this area. Majority, though, are that Eastern Orthodox, but you kind of see pockets of Islam throughout, populated with mixed indigenous religions or religious compositions, because there were other groups in there before as Russia kind of continued to expand. You get some Lamists who follow, Buddhism and the Dalai Lama, more of the tribal cults in the green. But again, that's more of the traditional stuff that's mixed in with others. But yeah, and so essentially with the Jewish population has been consistently leaving Russia over the last 150-ish years due to pogroms and persecution before and after the Holocaust, and then after and kind of the end throughout communism. All right. So you can kind of see all the data here as a result. All right. So there's more updated information than 2008 stuff. So flipping back over to China, I know that's kind of a bit of a switch. So the Uyghurs are ethnic minority, making up 45% of the Xinjiang province. That is this big section of northwest China. All right. But overall, that's less than 1.5% of China's overall, 1 billion plus population. So in 2017, over 225,000 were arrested for criminal charges. And most are arrested fairly on arbitrary things without ever being committed a crime, because again, it's the suspicion of what the religions might do. And the Uyghurs are detained in small overcrowded rooms, about 1,200 people to a camp, and the numbers keep growing. And it's been essentially a humanitarian crisis that's been kind of swept, not necessarily under the rug, but it hasn't gotten as much international attention as it might have, and is kind of, again, due to the COVID pandemic, has continued to kind of slide away from people not necessarily being aware of that. And so connecting with that is also those who are detained repeatedly watching re-education films with state-appointed imams or Muslim leaders and scholars with legal religious practices and appropriate interpretations of Islam that essentially put them to the state of China and being loyal to the Chinese government. So essentially propaganda. All right. And then China has also prohibited long beards that Muslim men often wear, and the veiling or the wearing of veils in public places, which is another trend that we see also in other countries as well, including France, which is trying to prohibit really any religious wear and garb, including Judaism and Christianity, to sort of unite, but it's also viewed as part of persecution as well. All right, and that's a good question in the book too that they bring up in their little small blurb. All right, so some videos on that. We'll come back to Ireland and move on to Israel and the Middle East in the next video.